I bought a house in a place called Serenity Meadows. The name itself should have been a screaming red flag, the kind of warning sign you see before you walk into a bear's cave or agree to help a friend move a piano. Places named Serenity or Tranquility or Whispering Pines are never serene, tranquil, or whispery. They're built on ancient burial grounds, toxic waste dumps, or, in my case, something infinitely worse. They're run by a homeowners association. And not just any HOA. The Serenity Meadows HOA was a special breed of awful, a finely tuned instrument of petty tyranny the likes of which civilization hadn't seen since the Spanish Inquisition, only with more rules about lawn maintenance. I didn't know this yet, of course. I was a sweet summer child, a doe-eyed fool with a pre-approved mortgage and a dream. My dream was simple. It involved a 30-year fixed-rate loan, a reasonably sized patch of grass to call my own, and a porch on which to place my magnum opus, my Mona Lisa, my reason for living, the Grizzly 5000 barbecue grill. It wasn't just a grill. It was a chrome and steel monument to freedom and perfectly cooked meat. It had 6 burners, a side smoker, a built-in rotisserie, and enough grilling surface to feed a small army, or at least my 3 friends when they came over. I had spent months researching it, years saving for it. This grill was the centerpiece of my new, quiet, suburban life. I was a 32-year-old graphic designer who worked from home. My daily human interaction was limited to the Slack messaging app and the delivery guy from DoorDash. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for a place to grill a ribeye steak without the scent of bus exhaust wafting through my window. I found Serenity Meadows. The houses were all turd beige, a soothing, non-threatening, soul-crushingly uniform shade of almond. The lawns were green carpets of unsettling perfection. The birds probably had to get a permit to sing. It was perfect. Or so I thought. The first hint of trouble came a day after I moved in, delivered by a mailman who had the haunted look of a man who's seen too much. It wasn't a welcome basket full of muffins. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the Serenity Meadows logo. A weeping willow gently caressing a perfectly still pond. Inside was my first official communication from the HOA, a violation notice. My crime? The welcome mat my sister had given me as a housewarming gift? It was a gag gift, a silly piece of rubber that read, in cheerful, blocky letters, "Hope you brought tacos." According to the letter, signed by someone named Brenda McMillan, President, my mat was in violation of Bylaw 17, Section C, Subsection 2, Exterior Welcome Surfaces. Apparently, it was not in compliance with the neighborhood's strictly enforced earth tone color palette. The letter went on to passive-aggressively suggest I could purchase a pre-approved, beige-colored mat from the HOA's preferred online vendor, a link to which was helpfully provided. I stood there, in the doorway of my new home, holding a legal threat over a taco-themed doormat. My welcome mat, a piece of rubber I was meant to wipe my muddy shoes on, had somehow offended the delicate aesthetic sensibilities of an entire neighborhood. I briefly wondered if they had a designated grievance and outrage subcommittee that met on Tuesdays to discuss such heinous crimes. Spoiler alert, they did, and it had a president. I'm not a revolutionary. My primary goal in life is to avoid confrontation so I have more time to watch documentaries about abandoned subway systems. So, I did what any sane, conflict-averse person would do. I flipped the mat over to its plain, boring black side. Black is an earth tone, right? Coal is black. The cold, dead void of space is black. It felt compliant enough. This, I would later learn, was my first tactical error. In the chess game of HOA warfare, it was a move that showed weakness, and the queen was about to make her move. A few days later, I was engaged in the sacred ritual of the new homeowner, the first mowing of the lawn. The sun was out, I had my headphones on, and I was in my own little world. That world was abruptly invaded by the high-pitched whine of an electric motor. I looked up to see a golf cart, the kind you usually see on a course, except this one was flying a small, custom flag bearing the weeping willow logo of Serenity Meadows. It zipped across the asphalt with military precision and came to a hard stop at the edge of my driveway. A woman in her mid-50s, dressed in blindingly white tennis apparel, hopped out. She had a blonde helmet of hair that looked like it could withstand a Category 4 hurricane, a deeply tanned face, and eyes that scanned my property with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator. In one hand, she held a clipboard. In the other, a tape measure. She marched toward me. I killed the mower engine. Good morning, I said, trying for neighborly. She didn't return the greeting. You must be Mr. Henderson, she stated, not asked. I'm the president. She said the word president with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious figures or founding fathers. I'm here to conduct your new resident lawn acclimation survey. Before I could ask what fresh hell a lawn acclimation survey was, she was on her knees on my lawn, unfurling the tape measure. She meticulously measured a single blade of grass. She clicked her tongue. 2.5 inches, she announced, her voice dripping with disappointment. As you'll find in your welcome packet, the bylaws clearly state that grass must be maintained at a verdant yet humble 2 3/4 inches. It's optimal for root health and, more importantly, aesthetic harmony. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Was this real? Was I in a fever dream? She wasn't done. She stood up, dusting her pristine white shorts. Furthermore, she continued, pointing a blood-red fingernail toward my house. Your garden hose. It's coiled counterclockwise. Bylaw 24F. All hoses must be coiled clockwise to prevent a disruption in the neighborhood's visual flow. She then gestured to my open garage. And your garage door has been open for approximately 23 minutes. The permissible window for ingress and egress is 15 minutes. It helps maintain a tidy appearance and deters opportunistic crime. I was stunned into a state of slack-jawed silence. This woman, this lifestyle curator, had a rule for the direction my hose was coiled. I just nodded. What else could I do? Argue that my hose's personal freedom was being infringed upon? We're not trying to be difficult, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice softening into a tone of condescending sympathy. We're simply curating a living experience. Think of me less as an enforcer and more as a guide to achieving communal perfection. She handed me a 30-page, professionally bound booklet from her clipboard. The cover read, Lawn, Garden Best Practices, Volume 1, The Serenity Meadows Way. I had a sinking, terrifying feeling that Volume 2 was probably about toilet paper orientation. Welcome to the neighborhood, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She then hopped back into her golf cart and zipped away, leaving me standing in my half-mowed lawn, holding a manual on how to properly live, feeling significantly less serene than I had 10 minutes prior. The real trouble started about a week later. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had a big project deadline, and the sky outside was turning a color I can only describe as apocalyptic bile. A sickly, greenish-gray gloom had settled over the beige landscape of Serenity Meadows. My phone started buzzing incessantly. Weather alerts. A severe thunderstorm warning. Then a tornado watch. Then, the big one, a tornado warning. A confirmed funnel cloud had been spotted in the next county over and was tracking directly toward us. This is a thing you get used to in this part of the country. You respect it, you go to the basement, you don't mess with it. The county's civil defense sirens began their ominous rising and falling wail in the distance. Any second now, the emergency alert system, the EAS, would hijack every television and radio signal, unleashing that horrifying, deafening tone that lets you know things are about to get very, very real. It's the soundtrack to the end of the world, and while it's terrifying, it's also weirdly comforting. It means someone, somewhere, is watching out for you. I had the news on my office TV, waiting for the inevitable takeover. The weatherman was pointing frantically at a swirling red blob on the map that was centered directly over our town. "Take cover now!" he yelled. And then, nothing. The TV didn't shriek. It just went quiet. Not static, not a lost signal, but a strange, rhythmic, pulsing buzz. A low hum, like a giant, angry insect, was trapped inside the television. I flicked to another channel. Same thing. I turned on the radio. Same hum. It was like the entire electromagnetic spectrum had been gagged. This is weird, I muttered to myself. Government incompetence is one thing, but the EAS is sacred. It's the one system that's supposed to be immune to everything except a direct nuclear strike or, apparently, the aesthetic whims of Serenity Meadows. I looked out my office window, past my perfectly compliant, black-backed welcome mat. The sky was now almost black. The wind was whipping the trees into a frenzy. And then I saw it. In Brenda's yard, across the street, nestled amongst her prize-winning HOA-approved rose bushes, was a new addition to her garden decor. It was a sleek, professional-looking satellite dish, maybe 3 feet in diameter, pointed directly skyward. A small green light on its base blinked with a steady, smug rhythm. It looked suspiciously, and I mean exactly, like a high-grade signal jammer. My brain struggled to connect the dots. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. A person might be crazy enough to regulate hose coiling, but to jam a federal tornado warning? For what possible reason? Because the alert tone was too declass? Because it wasn't an earth tone? I didn't have time to finish the thought. The wind hit the house like a freight train. The lights flickered and died. The world outside my window dissolved into a blurry mess of horizontal rain and flying debris. I heard a loud crack as my neighbor's ornamental cherry tree split in two. Then, the true horror. I watched, helpless, as the wind ripped the cover off my beloved Grizzly 5000. For a moment, the grill stood its ground, a noble bastion of steel against the storm. But the wind was too strong. It lifted my 600-pound monument to testosterone and tossed it across the yard like an empty beer can. It cartwheeled through the air in a graceful, tragic arc before crashing into my other neighbor's white picket fence, twisting one of its mighty legs into a sad, metallic pretzel. But the indignities were not over. A flash of pink caught my eye. My neighbor's flamingo lawn ornament, liberated from its earthly tether, became a low-flying projectile of doom. It rocketed across the lawn and smashed directly through my office window, embedding itself in the drywall next to my desk. The whole violent episode lasted maybe 3 minutes. And then, silence. The wind died down. The rain softened to a drizzle. I was left in the dark, with the smell of rain, broken glass, and the faint, mocking scent of my neighbor's HOA-approved potpourri. The flamingo stared at me from the wall, its cold, dead, plastic eye a silent accusation. My grill, my beautiful Grizzly 5000, was a casualty of war. A war I didn't even know I was fighting. And I had a pretty damn good idea who the enemy general was. The 3 days after the storm were a blur of insurance calls and the constant buzz of chainsaws. The freak storm, as everyone was calling it, had come out of nowhere, leaving a trail of snapped branches, dented cars, and shattered nerves. The prevailing theory on the Neighborhood Next Door app was a freak microburst. No one understood why the sirens had been so faint, or why the EAS alert never came through. I knew, of course. I just didn't know what to do with the information. Accuse the HOA president of a federal crime based on a suspicious-looking garden accessory? Even I wasn't that confrontational. Then, on the third day, salvation arrived in the form of 2 black Ford sedans with official U.S. government plates. They rolled into our quiet little cul-de-sac with an air of grim purpose. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in navy blue jackets with FEMA emblazoned in bold yellow letters on the back, stepped out. They moved with the unhurried confidence of people who have the full weight of the federal government behind them. One of them was holding a device that looked like a cross between a stud finder and a ghost-hunting gadget from a cable TV show. They didn't stop to ask for directions. They walked straight down the center of the street, a silent, determined procession, ignoring the curious stares of residents emerging from their beige houses. The man with the gadget swept it back and forth. As they approached Brenda's house, her lawn, of course, was already immaculate, the single fallen leaf, presumably having been vaporized by her sheer force of will, the device began to beep. Slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, until it was emitting a solid, undeniable shriek. It was pointed directly at the new satellite dish nestled in her rose garden. Brenda must have had a sixth sense for unauthorized government activity on her turf. Her front door flew open and she emerged, hands on her hips, her face a mask of pure indignation. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is private property, and I'll have you know your lead vehicle is parked at a slight 6-degree angle to the curb, which is a clear violation of Curb Appeal Ordinance 7B. The lead agent, a tall man with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and regret, didn't even blink. He just held up his badge. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Miller with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We've tracked the source of an illegal signal jamming broadcast to this specific location. This broadcast occurred on Tuesday afternoon and directly interfered with a National Weather Service tornado warning." Brenda's face, which had been a healthy shade of angry tan, began to pale. I was watching the whole thing from my new professionally boarded-up office window, munching on popcorn. It was better than television. I have no idea what you're talking about, she stammered. That's my long-range birdwatching camera. Agent Miller gave the dish a flat, unimpressed look. Ma'am, this is a Spectre-class broad-spectrum signal jammer. They're highly illegal for civilian use. We're confiscating it as evidence. He handed his partner a pair of bolt cutters. As the second agent began snipping the cables, Agent Miller produced a folded document from his jacket. He handed it to Brenda. This is an official citation from the Federal Communications Commission and FEMA for the willful and illegal disabling of a life-saving emergency broadcast system. The entire neighborhood was outside now. Gary, from 2 doors down, whose kid's SpongeBob trampoline was now residing at the bottom of his pool. Mrs. Gable, whose prized Japanese maple had been uprooted. We were all watching, a silent Greek chorus to this unfolding drama. Brenda unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned it. Her jaw went slack. The color drained completely from her face, only to be replaced by a sudden, violent surge of crimson. She held the paper aloft, her hand shaking. $100,000? She shrieked, the sound echoing through the stunned silence of the cul-de-sac. They're fining me $100,000? For protecting the neighborhood from noise pollution? Agent Miller just nodded, his expression unchanging. You have 30 days to pay or file an appeal, ma'am. The contact information is on the second page. We take this very, very seriously. Consider yourself lucky that the damage in this area was minimal and no one was seriously hurt. With a final, decisive snip, the second agent liberated the jammer from its cables and carried it back to the sedan like a trophy. They got in their cars and drove away, leaving Brenda standing in the middle of her perfect lawn, holding a 6-figure bill for her commitment to tranquility. In that moment, she wasn't just Brenda McMillan, the HOA president who liked to measure grass. She was a martyr, a freedom fighter, a woman who had stared into the swirling vortex of a tornado and said, "Not on my watch." And for her troubles, she'd been handed a bill that could have bought a pretty decent condo in Boca Raton. The war for Serenity Meadows had just gone nuclear. My first order of business, now that justice had been sort of served, was to deal with my own personal fallout. Namely, the gaping, flamingo-sized hole in my office wall and the mangled corpse of my grill lying in state on the patio. My insurance guy had helpfully explained that my policy covered the window, but the grill was considered patio furniture and fell under an Act of God clause, which apparently meant God had a personal vendetta against my barbecue plans. I needed a contractor. I found a company in the local listings called Sal's Fix, Forget It, which had a 5-star rating and a reassuringly old-school logo. Sal arrived the next day. He was a man who looked like he'd been built, not born. He was in his 60s, with a magnificent, graying mustache, hands the size of dinner plates, and a sigh that seemed to contain the weary wisdom of the ages. He pulled up in a beat-up Ford F-150 that was a beautiful, chaotic mess of tools, parts, and empty coffee cups. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in this neighborhood. He got out, took one look at my house, then one look at the oppressively perfect house next door, and then a long look up and down the street. "Ho, huh?" he grunted. It wasn't a question. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "Kid, I can smell an HOA from 5 miles away. It's a mix of desperation, fresh-cut grass, and beige paint." He walked over to my shattered window. "Flamingo, you said?" "A pink one." "Yep, sounds about right." He took some measurements, scribbled on a notepad, and gave me a price that was surprisingly reasonable. Then his eyes fell on the grill. He walked over to it and nudged the twisted leg with the toe of his steel-toed boot. He looked at it with the solemnity of a coroner examining a body. "This thing?" he said, his voice gentle. "She's dead, son. You can't fix this. You can only mourn it." I explained the whole situation to him as he worked up the estimate. The storm, the lack of warning, Brenda and her jammer, the arrival of FEMA. I expected shock, or at least surprise. Sal just nodded along, a faint, knowing smile playing under his mustache. "A woman named Brenda who drives a golf cart like she's storming the beaches of Normandy?" he asked. "You know her?" My voice was filled with awe. "Kid," he said, leaning against his truck. "Every plumber, roofer, and handyman in a 50-mile radius knows Brenda McMillan. She's a legend. Last year, she tried to fine my crew because our paint drop cloth splain, white drop cloths, clashed with the seasonal flower arrangements in the community park. She wrote up a formal citation and everything. Said it was disrupting the visual harmony. What did you do? I told her I'd be happy to comply as soon as she complied with OSHA regulations regarding proper footwear on a quasi-active work site. She was wearing open-toed sandals. He chuckled. She backed off. But she's got a file on me. I guarantee it. I felt a wave of relief. In Sal, I had found a kindred spirit, a man who understood that the world was filled with bureaucratic madness, and the best you could do was patch the holes, send the invoice, and pray the whole structure didn't collapse on you. So, the window will take a few days to get the custom paint in, Sal said, handing me the estimate. I can have my guys here on Friday to frame it out. Sounds good, I said. Little did I know, Friday was a long way away. Brenda's war was just beginning, and she was about to call in reinforcements. Us. Brenda, it turned out, was not the type to take a 100-0 federal fine lying down. 2 days after the visit from FEMA, a new notice appeared on every door in Serenity Meadows. It was printed on the same creamy, expensive cardstock as my welcome mat violation, but the tone was decidedly more frantic. It was a summons to an emergency HOA town hall community defense strategy session. Attendance was mandatory. The community clubhouse was a sterile, soulless room with beige folding chairs, beige walls, and a series of framed motivational posters with pictures of eagles soaring over mountains, emblazoned with words like community, integrity, and excellence. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The room was packed. Every homeowner was there, a nervous energy crackling in the air. Brenda stood at a lectern at the front, looking pale but resolute. She was dressed in a navy blue pantsuit, an apparent attempt to look presidential and serious. She tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice quivering with manufactured emotion. "As you know, our community has been targeted. We have been attacked by a hostile outside entity." A low murmur went through the crowd. Gary, the SpongeBob trampoline owner, muttered, "You mean the tornado you let hit us?" Brenda ignored him. She launched into a fiery, 10-minute speech that would have made a conspiracy theorist blush. It was a masterclass in deflection and victimhood. She spoke of government overreach, federal tyranny, and an assault on our sovereign right to a peaceful and quiet existence. She never once used the words I or my fine. It was always we and the situation we face. Then she dropped the bomb. "This unjust federal tax is not a burden I can bear alone," she declared, placing a hand over her heart. "It is a test of our community's resolve. Therefore, to combat this aggression and defend our shared values, I am left with no choice but to levy an emergency community defense special assessment." She paused for dramatic effect. "The fine of $100,000 will be divided equally among all 50 households in Serenity Meadows. That comes to a one-time payment of $2,000 per household. A small price to pay," she finished, her voice rising, "for freedom." For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence, as 50 households simultaneously did the math and processed the sheer, unmitigated gall of her proposal. Then the room exploded. It wasn't just a murmur, it was a roar. The carefully curated serenity of Serenity Meadows shattered into a million angry pieces. "Are you out of your mind?" shouted Gary, leaping to his feet. "You want $2,000 from me? My son's SpongeBob trampoline is currently an abstract sculpture at the bottom of my pool because you thought a tornado warning was too noisy. You can pay that fine with the money you save on hearing aids." A woman in the back stood up. "You're asking us to pay for your federal crime? That's insane!" Suddenly, the neighborhood had fractured into two distinct, wildly imbalanced factions. Team Brenda. This consisted of approximately 4 people. There was a sycophantic couple who nodded along to everything she said, and a very old man who seemed to be confused about where he was. Team Sanity. This was everyone else. The angry, the confused, the financially terrified. And somehow, I found myself becoming one of its unwilling spokespeople. My years of avoiding confrontation melted away under the heat of a potential $2,000 bill for something I didn't do. I stood up, my heart was pounding. "Brenda," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I did a little reading of the HOA bylaws you were so kind to provide me." I held up the thick binder. According to Article 12, Section E, Liability and Indemnification, any fines or legal penalties incurred by a board member as a result of gross negligence or illegal activity are the sole personal responsibility of that individual member. The HOA is explicitly indemnified. The room fell silent again. All eyes turned to Brenda. Her face, which had been set in a mask of righteous defiance, began to crumble. She had been beaten with her own weapon. The bylaws. That clause is for minor infractions, she sputtered. This is a federal attack. It's different. Is it? I pressed. Because it looks like you broke the law, and now you want your neighbors to bail you out. With all due respect, you can't just pass the buck all 100,000 of them to us. The meeting descended into chaos. People were shouting, pointing fingers. Brenda, realizing she had lost the room completely, slammed her hand on the lectern. This is what they want, she screamed over the din. To divide us, to turn neighbor against neighbor. Fine, if you won't stand with me, you stand against me. You're all government sympathizers. She grabbed her clipboard, her symbol of authority, and stormed out of the clubhouse, leaving behind a room full of angry, united neighbors. We were united in our shock, our outrage, and our collective refusal to pay $2,000 for Brenda's acoustic sensibilities. The HOA civil war had officially begun. The next few days were tense. The Neighborhood Next Door app became a digital war zone of passive-aggressive posts and thinly veiled accusations. Brenda, now a pariah, doubled down on her tyranny. She began leaving violation notices for things that weren't even in the bylaws. Your petunias are an unharmonious shade of pink. Your children's laughter was measured at a volume exceeding the community's ambient noise level. She was a woman unhinged. The chaos finally spilled directly onto my doorstep on Friday, the day Sal and his crew were scheduled to arrive. Sal's work truck, a glorious beacon of blue-collar reality in our sea of beige conformity, was parked legally on the street in front of my house. His two-man crew was carefully removing the shattered remnants of my old window. Classic rock was playing softly from a portable radio. It was a scene of honest, productive work. And Brenda couldn't stand it. Her golf cart appeared at the end of the street and came bearing down on my property like a predator drone. She screeched to a halt, hopped out, and marched directly up to Sal. "Excuse me?" she barked, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This vehicle is a commercial eyesore, and your tools are cluttering the visual landscape." Sal, a master of the art of ignoring people, didn't even look up from the caulk gun he was inspecting. "Mornin', Brenda," he said cheerfully. "And your music?" she continued, her voice rising in pitch. "That sonic pollution is a direct violation of the peace and quiet we are entitled to." Sal slowly turned to face her. "Lady, it's Tom Petty. If you've got a problem with Tom Petty, you've got a problem with America." This was too much for Brenda. Her authority had been questioned. Her carefully curated world was being invaded by rock and roll and power tools. She drew herself up to her full height. "That's it," she declared. "I am placing you under citizen's arrest for the flagrant violation of multiple HOA covenants." She actually reached out and tried to grab Sal's arm. Sal didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. He simply held up one of his giant hands like a traffic cop, pulled his smartphone from his pocket with the other, and dialed 3 numbers. "Yeah, hi," he said into the phone, looking Brenda dead in the eye. "It's Sal. I'm over on Elm Street in Serenity Meadows. Yep, her again. She's trying to arrest me this time." I watched the whole incredible scene unfold from my doorway, my mouth hanging open. Less than 5 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out with the slow, deliberate movements of men who were being paid by the hour and wished they were anywhere else. They knew Brenda on sight. Their entire demeanor screamed, "Oh, for the love of God, it's her again." "What's the problem here, Brenda?" the older officer asked, his voice saturated with a level of weariness that could only be earned through years of dealing with Serenity Meadows. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Brenda said, switching to her damsel in distress voice. "This man is refusing to comply with community standards and has created a public nuisance." The cop looked at Sal's truck, parked legally. He looked at the crew, working quietly. He looked back at Brenda. "Brenda, we have been over this," he said, his voice a masterpiece of forced patience. "HOA bylaws are not criminal statutes. You cannot arrest him. His truck is fine. He is allowed to work here. The HOA is not a sovereign nation. Please, for the love of all that is holy, go back to your house." Brenda was aghast. "So you're on FEMA's side? I see how it is. You're all part of the same corrupt system. You'll probably fine me for breathing too loudly next." "That's an idea," the younger cop muttered under his breath. The older cop shot him a look, then turned back to Brenda. Ma'am, if we get another call about you harassing residents or their legally contracted workers, you could be facing actual charges. Do you understand? Defeated, Brenda shot me a look that could curdle milk, spun on her heel, and retreated to her golf cart. The officers tipped their hats to Sal and drove off. Sal watched her go, shaking his head. He walked over to me, wiping his hands on a rag. See what I mean, kid? He said with a sigh. It's a full-blown three-ring circus. He handed me a revised work order. Anyway, that'll be another $100 for the hazard pay, general annoyances fee. I didn't even argue. He'd earned it. Defeated in her attempts to crowdfund her fine and thwarted by the local police, a normal person might have given up. They might have sold some stocks, taken out a loan, and quietly paid the government. But Brenda was not a normal person. Brenda was a lifestyle curator, and she had one last, desperate card to play. She was going to prove once and for all that she didn't need the federal government. She was going to save us from ourselves. A new flyer appeared on our doors. This one was printed on cheap copy paper, in a font that looked suspiciously like Comic Sans, sure sign that Brenda's budget and her grip on reality were both dwindling. It announced that she had developed a superior, organic, community-based early warning system to replace the unreliable and excessively noisy federal system. I read the details with a growing sense of dread. Her system consisted of 3 equally insane parts. First was the weather prediction module. This was a laminated chart she had taped to the community notice board, based entirely on her observations of a local gray squirrel she had named Timmy. The chart included such scientific gems as, if Timmy the squirrel buries extra nuts, expect precipitation within 48 hours, and, if Timmy's tail appears excessively bushy, it is an indicator of impending high winds. Second was the visual alert component. This involved a series of color-coded flags she had sewn herself to be raised on the community flagpole in the park. A yellow flag meant, be aware. An orange flag meant, prepare for inclement conditions. And a black flag, upon which she had crudely drawn a skull and crossbones, meant, imminent danger, seek shelter. Third, and most terrifyingly, was the audible alert mechanism. Brenda, it seemed, had used what was left of her savings to purchase a large antique naval horn on eBay, the kind of horn used on battleships to signal an attack. She decided to conduct a live drill of her new system on a perfectly sunny, tranquil Saturday morning. According to her squirrel-based meteorological data, Timmy had been chasing his own tail in a frantic, counterclockwise pattern, which, according to her chart, was an unmistakable sign of a severe atmospheric disturbance. I was on my deck, trying to enjoy a cup of coffee, when I saw her march to the flagpole in the common area. She solemnly raised the skull and crossbones flag. A few neighbors out walking their dogs stopped and stared, confused. Then she unveiled the horn. It was a massive brass instrument mounted on a wooden tripod. She took a deep breath and let loose. The sound that erupted was not a drill, it was an apocalypse. It was a deafening, soul-shattering blat that ripped through the morning calm like a sonic bomb. It was a sound so loud it rattled the windows in my house. Birds scattered from the trees. Dogs started howling for miles. At the entrance to the neighborhood, a startled driver slammed on his brakes, causing a 3-car fender bender. But the real disaster was just getting started. The horn was so loud, it caused a stress fracture in the window of the house, closest to the house belonging to Gary of trampoline fame. And the horn itself, being an ancient piece of naval surplus, had wiring that was likely installed around the time of the First World War. The power surge caused the wiring to overheat, short-circuit, and ignite the dry decorative mulch at the base of the flagpole. Within seconds, a small, cheerful fire was crackling away in the community park. It was perfect. It was a beautiful, spectacular, multi-layered disaster of her own making. In her quest to save us from a fictional storm based on a neurotic squirrel, she had caused a car crash, shattered a window, and started a very real fire. Her career as a lifestyle curator was, quite literally, going up in smoke. This was the final straw. Someone called 911. The wail of a real emergency vehicle, a fire truck, soon replaced the unholy blast of Brenda's horn. The fire was put out in minutes, but the damage was done. Brenda stood amidst the chaos, horn in one hand, smoldering flag rope in the other, looking utterly bewildered. She had flown too close to the sun, and her wings of pure insanity had finally melted. The final HOA meeting was not called by Brenda. It was called by the rest of us. The mood in the clubhouse was not angry anymore. It was resolute. This wasn't a shouting match. It was an intervention. Brenda was there, sitting alone in the front row, looking small and defeated. She tried to open the meeting, but Gary stood up and gently took the gavel from her. "I think we'll handle it from here, Brenda," he said, not unkindly. The room was full, but there were some new faces in the crowd. Sal, the contractor, was there, leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed. "I'm representing the interests of local businesses harassed by petty tyranny," he told me with a wink. The 2 police officers who had responded to the horn incident were also there, standing by the door, just to keep the peace. And, to my utter delight, a new guest had arrived. He was a man in a rumpled suit, with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Frank, FEMA. He had apparently been sent to follow up on the unpaid fine and had walked right into the aftermath of the Great Naval Horn Fire of Serenity Meadows. One by one, residents stood up and aired their grievances. It wasn't a yelling match. It was a calm, devastatingly specific accounting of the chaos. Gary spoke about his trampoline and his new broken window. A mother talked about the fender bender. Mrs. Gable lamented her uprooted Japanese maple. I spoke briefly about the flamingo, my grill, and the simple fact that we had all been put in danger. Finally, it was my turn to make the formal motion. All eyes were on me. I stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the facts with the driest humor I could muster. "For the past few weeks," I began, looking directly at Brenda, "we've been living in a state of escalating absurdity. It started with welcome mats and grass height, which was annoying. But then it escalated. You declared war on the weather. You lost. Then you declared war on the federal government. You lost. Then you declared war on a contractor, the local police department, and a squirrel named Timmy." A few chuckles rippled through the room. "The problem," I continued, "isn't the world. The problem is that your term as president has become a one-woman disaster movie, and we're tired of being the extras. We didn't move here to be curated. We moved here to live. To have ugly welcome mats. To cut our grass to the height we want. To not have our windows shattered by flying projectiles because someone thinks a tornado siren spoils the ambiance. We're supposed to be a community, not a museum exhibit, and we'd like our community back." I sat down. I moved for a vote of no confidence and the immediate removal of Brenda McMillan as HOA president. Gary seconded the motion. The vote was a landslide, 49-1. Brenda was officially dethroned. As the new interim president, Gary, took the lectern to discuss the next steps, FEMA Frank stood up. He sighed the deep, weary sigh of a man who has seen the absolute dumbest things humanity has to offer. "Folks," he said, his voice raspy, "look, we're not the bad guys. My entire job is to help people not die in preventable disasters. It's a pretty low bar. The $100,000 fine still stands." A groan went through the room. "However," he continued, holding up a hand, "given the recent series of escalating events, and seeing as the responsible party has been removed from power, my agency is willing to be reasonable. If the HOA can formally draft and implement a real emergency preparedness plan that involves listening to the National Weather Service and not squirrel sand submit it for our approval, we will suspend the fine pending a 2-year probationary period of non-insanity." He looked straight at Brenda. "And ma'am," he said, "for the love of God, stop buying signal jammers and naval horns." Brenda didn't say a word. She just picked up her purse and walked out of the clubhouse for the last time. The door swung shut behind her, and a collective sigh of relief washed over the room. The reign of terror was over. A week later, a for sale sign appeared on Brenda's perfect lawn. It was planted slightly crooked. No one cared. The neighborhood had changed. We were still paying for the damages from Brenda's horn fiasco, Gary's window, the fender benders, the scorched patch of park, but we were doing it together. We had a new HOA board, led by Gary. The first thing they did was hold a ceremonial burning of 90% of the old bylaws. The rulebook was now a single, double-sided sheet of paper. Sal had finished my window. As a housewarming, battle-won gift, he had taken my mangled Grizzly 5000 back to his workshop. He brought it back that afternoon. He had managed to weld the leg back on. It was ugly, scarred, and the chrome was scorched, but it was standing. It was a veteran. She's got character now, kid, Sal said, giving the grill a proud pat. She's seen things. You can't buy that. Gary came over, beer in hand, and presented me with a gift from the new HOA. It was a new welcome mat. It was a simple black mat that just said, in plain white letters, whatever, just wipe your feet. The new official motto of the HOA is, try not to be a jerk, Gary said. We're still workshopping it. We stood on my deck, the three of us, drinking a beer as the sun began to set. The neighborhood was quiet. But it wasn't the sterile, enforced quiet from before. It was a real, relaxed peace. The kind of peace that comes after a long, ridiculous war. I hadn't found the perfect serenity I had been looking for when I moved here. Instead, I'd found something messier, more complicated, and infinitely better. A community. A weird, dysfunctional, traumatized community, but a community nonetheless. I had a story to tell and neighbors who were, finally, normal. Or as normal as you can be when you've all survived the reign of a rogue lifestyle curator. I fired up my scarred Grizzly 5000 for the first time. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the beige houses. It was quiet. Truly quiet. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the free air, and savored the moment. And that's when I heard it. It was a new sound, faintly from a few houses down, drifting on the evening breeze. It wasn't a siren or a horn. It was the unmistakable, high-pitched, and deeply irritating sound of a single, poorly played bagpipe. I squinted. A new neighbor I hadn't met yet was standing on their porch, dressed in a full kilt, apparently practicing for an upcoming recital on Mars. I watched him for a long moment. Then I sighed, shook my head, and a slow smile spread across my face. Suburbia, like nature, abhors a vacuum. The madness hadn't vanished. It had just found a new, tartangent-clad host. I popped open another beer and raised it in a silent toast to the horizon, to my grill, and to the eternal, uncuratable chaos of it all. At least bagpipes weren't a federal offense. Probably.